Here we go. We're going to get Fortnite running on your obsolete computer. If you are like me, you might have a lot of old parts laying around and you want to throw something together, or either to use or to sell, or you just you don't have a lot of parts laying around and your computer is just old. So I'm going to show you how to get it running and working and usable. First step is try and see if it plays. If it does play, but poorly, that's a start. If it doesn't play, well, it should play. If it doesn't play, you might just be screwed. But if it does start, run, and play, we got something to work with, even if it is performing poorly. So let me show you what to do. In this situation, with this computer that I'm building, out of spare parts to sell, not for much, more for fun than anything, probably like $100. It has an old dual core, and that's the limiting factor. When the CPU cycles hit 100%, when it's being used at 100%, it seems like it gets a little bit of lag input, micro stutter, loading lag, whatever. It does play fine, but it gets these lag pulses. Everything that's in this computer, I've already tested in other computers. Video card, hard drive, memory, and played Fortnite on. So I know the limiting factor in this situation is the processor, because that's the only thing that's being different, essentially. And the lag seems to only happen when the processor reaches 100% utilization. So yeah, anyway, I got a lot better, so I'm going to show you what to do to where it is very manageable now. Like I said, the best way to describe it is like loading lag or micro stuttering. It's not actual low frame rate. It is the smooth action, the motion, and then you get that short jump, and then got the smooth action again. So I got that greatly improved. I'm going to show you what to do. And my next challenge is I'm going to build a single core machine out of old parts I got laying around and try to do the same thing. This was extremely challenging, and I almost didn't think it was possible to get this thing to run smooth. So I'm curious to see if I can get an old single core to run smooth. And a little about the computer itself. Most dual cores would be fine, but this is an older AMD X2 5600 at 2.9 gigahertz, and it's got a little less oomph than the Core 2 Duos or the i3, and of course way less oomph than an i5, but mainly due to transistor count of the processor itself. Anyway, I'll show you what to do. Okay, this is the system I have going on right now. That's about ready to go down to 2.8 because I'm going to turn cool and quiet back off. That way it holds a steady clock frequency. It seems like it performs better in Fortnite by a fair amount with it off. Got 7 gigs of RAM. I had 8, but I swapped 1 to 2 gigs out for 1 because Fortnite seems to use, at the current settings, about 4.5. Well, the whole system combined uses about 4.5 gigs of RAM. I'm going to go ahead and restart the computer, and I'm going to go through the list of things to do. Starting with number 1, on this specific computer, I'm going to turn off AMD Cool and Quiet. So, restart. I'm only turning this off because the steady clock frequency seems to be giving me better frames and better. Everything's a little bit better all the way around. On most newer processors, it's not going to be necessary. But for whatever reason, I think there might be a slight incompatibility of Windows 10 also, because during benchmarks I see that the clock frequencies are not going to maximum clocks every time, or it takes a duration of time to do such a thing where it should be instant. So I'm doing everything for maximum performance on this older, some would say ancient setup, but so that's going off. So step number 1 is turn off cool and quiet if you have an AMD computer. Next, I'm going to go in the game itself and go over the options there. Everything's going to be a little bit different. You got to figure out what your weakness is. Is your weakness RAM? Is your weakness processor? Or is it graphics card? Now this computer, the bottleneck, the weakness is the processor. If your bottleneck's RAM, add more RAM if you can. If your weakness is processor, upgrade processor if you can. Now this specific motherboard, you really can't get too much faster processor. This is a 2.8 or 9 depending on how it's operating. The fastest you can get up to is 3.2, so gigahertz dual core, same architecture. Now this graphics card's actually pretty decent, so I put this same graphics card in the quad core computer, and it was able to basically under same settings get a rock solid 40 frames a second, zero lag, zero nothing, you know, well, zero anything, I should say, detrimental. Everything just flowed very well. Hard disk speed on some games is an issue. Now this does have a slow hard drive. It's out of a laptop, but I played Fortnite on that laptop while the hard drive was in there, and I didn't have any micro stutter issues. So that's the main problem with this, is the CPU cycles go up to 100% way too much, and when that happens, GPU utilization is not full, so we're lacking frames there. The clear bottleneck, which that's fine, lacking some frames from bottleneck's fine, but the real issue I was having is large and frequent micro stuttering. So let's just start up the game. Let me get Task Manager up so I can got something to reference off of a little bit. I apologize, my tutorials are usually long. I find it better to go over everything. I think the system requirements gone up on this game since it's come out, or since before it's come out, which is ridiculous. This game really, in all reality, you know, I keep reading it's CPU intensive. Well, yeah, I can see how it is, but not to the point that it's actually being used. I mean, I used to play Battlefield Bad Company, which has destructible environments 2, Bad Company 2 I should say, on this computer processor I should say. I used to play Grand Theft Auto 4 on this processor back in the day. You know, it would do it. And I'm sure both those games have way more going on than Fortnite. Computer wise, I think there's a great lack of optimization of the processes that are actually running. So obviously not utilization of the processor, but the actual efficiency of the processes gotta be lacking, have to be. There's, especially with the graphics turned down, what's really going on? I mean, other than network stuff going on in the background, keeping track of everything going on. So okay, let's go over these options as soon as this loads. Okay, this is okay. Go to settings. Let's go over some of these. We'll go step by step. For best performance, you want to be in full screen. The resolution in this case is set to 440 by 900 because I'm trying to keep my video RAM usage below 1024 megabytes, 1 gig, because that's my graphics card has 1 gig. So I got everything dialed in basically for that. Now my actual bottleneck is the processor, not the graphics card in this situation. However, on the other setups I noticed, well, for instance, when I had this graphics card and the quad core system, testing it out for this game, that I noticed that if you exceed the video memory, there will be some sharp lag from that as it's swapping out memory between the system and video RAM. So use MSI Afterburner, download that, track that RAM, see how much you're using. You want to stay below your graphics card RAM capacity. That way you don't get sharp lag from that. Now in game, my frame rate right now goes between 25 to 35, and I was having issues with sharp lag and also environmental pop-in. It has to be CPU related because of the cycles. Somehow it's some sort of glitch where the processor is loaded down and it doesn't want to load things properly. Somehow it's also not prioritizing things in the correct way, that it's not loading things properly, and also you're getting lag. You should never get lag, really. Micro stuttering, I should say, or stuttering, even when your CPU is loaded down. If everything's prioritized right, you shouldn't get that, but I am getting it. So for the frame rate setter, I set it at 30 frames. The idea behind that is when the frame rate would allow it to go over 30 frames, it could free up some cycles, possibly to do some things in the background, and hopefully when things become CPU intensive again to where it would dip under 30 frames a second, it could possibly give the CPU some time to get its ducks in order, so there's a little bit less lag there. Micro stutter. Okay, view distance, got that on the air, trying to minimize vertices. That's the only idea behind that. Shadows off, that's for VRAM mostly, and to free up the GPU. Side note, my average GPU usage is only at probably about 65% because it's not pushing this card at all because of, like I said, CPU bottleneck. Anti-aliasing, I have this on medium. FXAA, which is medium, uses basically no graphics power or processing power, CPU power at all. That uses VRAM once it go past medium, so I just got it on medium. Textures, I got it on medium because that's best balance between VRAM and GPU utilization, I feel, for this card. Both of these will not affect processor bottlenecks at all, so use whatever you think's desirable for your graphics card. Effects are on low because effects are going to have influence from the processor. Keep them on low to keep the workload on the processor light. Post-processing, that should be mostly graphics card only, but just in case, I got that on low. I have VSync on, only because I really don't like tearing. I got motion blur off. That should be mostly graphics card only, but just in case it affects the processor at all, workload at all, I got that on off. The frame counter on so I can count the frames. Okay, now that's just the graphics. Now there's a few gems in here that you can change that I don't see anyone changing, and that is under a couple things. For one, game settings. I got vibration on off, aim assist on off, which that only affects you if you have a controller, but I still have it turned off just in case it does anything in the background. I have peripheral lighting on off. That was on default on, so that is a possible process going on in the background that just got eliminated. And then here's the Streamer mode, turn that off. It should already be off, but turn it off anyway. That is going to use a lot of resources if that's on. Memory, processor, hard disk. Now here's the real hidden gem. Record replays. Turn that off. That is going to free up a lot of processing power, hard disk usage, and memory. So that is the real hidden gem here, and that's under game settings. Turn that off. That was on default to be on. And record large team replays. That default was off. Leave that off. So that is a real big thing here. Turn that off by itself made a noticeable difference. Okay, on audio, go to quality. Put that on low. Now, if you're running the audio out through your video card, I do believe the video card does most, if not all, of the audio processing. If you have a computer bottleneck, put that on low just in case it has any influence on a computer workload at all. So, got that on low. Another thing is put push to talk on. That way your microphone's only operating when you push to talk, because that does have influence on the processor. When you're sending out voice over IP, that is using the processor to do that. So minimize processor workload by having voice chat push to talk on. Now this is not all the settings I changed. These are only the in-game settings. Briefly, before I show you what settings I changed out of game, we'll go play the game for a little bit so you can see the finished product. And then after that preview, then we can go see what settings I changed in Windows to help improve the performance. Okay, I just died, and I'm gonna spectate this guy and talk about what we're seeing. As you can see, the frame rate counter's off when I'm dead, but fluctuating between 20 to 30 frames a second on average, I'd say. And not ideal, but the graphic, if I could turn the graphics the rest of the way down, it's not going to make a difference. It's the computer CPU is what's the limiting factor right now. As you can see, there's slight micro stuttering. It's kind of frequent, but right there's kind of a hard stutter. It's fairly frequent, but compared to what it was, it's a way better. And the game's actually playable. I mean, not ideal, obviously. Ideal is 60 frames a second, smooth as silk, you know, or 120 frames a second. But it's playable. Perfect for a spare computer. You have a friend over, or it's perfect if your computer couldn't really do it at all beforehand, and it's the only computer you got. But see, it seems to be working fairly good. After this battle here, we'll go and I'll show you what I changed on Windows settings to make this happen a little bit better. And also, I went back to 8 gigs in RAM. I was having a little bit of pop-in issues with the 7 gigs of RAM. So I'm assuming that the drive was loading a little bit more, just a hair more somehow, rather than when it had 8 gigs. On my on my quad core system that I was experimenting with, it had no issues whatsoever, and it with running at 4 gigs actually. So there again, everything ties back to the CPU bottleneck on this computer. As soon as it needs to load from the drive, it draws a little bit of CPU cycles in the process, and having less RAM is actually a detriment to the frame rate. So in this situation, 8 gigs is necessary, but if you have a faster processor, fairly fast processor, you can get away with actually 4 gigs of RAM on this game, from what I can tell. So, okay, maybe we'll wait till after this battle. This guy's really tearing it up. Okay, now I'm going to show you my Windows settings I changed. Seeing how this is an older computer, and the game was utilizing 100% of the CPU most of the time, I of course went to Task Manager to see what I could possibly do to help it, and I found that besides the game itself, what was using the most processing power was Superfetch and Windows malware executable, also known as Windows Defender Real-Time Protection. So Superfetch is a feature you're going to want to leave on most computers, but in this situation, Superfetch was using up to 25% of my CPU processing power, which was about on par with what Windows Defender was doing as well. So when a game already demands 100% of a CPU's power, and it has to slash that in half because of background processes, you have no choice but to disable them. Come up here, disable Superfetch. Now, when you disable Superfetch, what you're going to find is you're going to have possibly a slightly slower desktop environment, where I've done this on a couple computers and I really haven't noticed any slower desktop environment. But where I have noticed a difference is load times coming into a game, you know, in a situation where you have a load bar. Because what's happening is, before you even start that game, if you play that game a lot or whatever program, it's going to load some of those elements into the memory and the virtual memory. Anyway, while you're in the game itself, Superfetch is irrelevant, because the game is going to load what it thinks it needs to load into memory and virtual memory. So you might have a situation where the game says, hey, load this, and then Superfetch is like, I think we might need to load this, and then the game says, hey, load this, and then guess what? Superfetch is hogging the hard drive and the processor. So, and then when you have a slow hard drive and a slow processor relative to the game you're playing, what happens is you have a conflict of interest. So while you're physically in the playable game itself, most games are going to stream the information as required. Superfetch more or less just gets in the way. So all you have to do is go to Services, go to Superfetch, and disable this. And now I don't have any spikes, Superfetch spikes of 25%. Let's see here. Nothing going on, just the way you want it. You want to be dormant when you're playing a game, for the most part. Now for the Windows real-time protection, only turn that off if this is a spare computer and this has no vital information on it, because you allow yourself potentially to get a virus, possibly. Odds are you're not going to get one unless you go to less than savior sites, so you'll be fine. Just do regular searches, like once a week, or if you think you get a virus, do a search. But like I said, only disable this if you have no vital information, or if it's a spare computer. Let's see here, templates. Go to local group policy editor, administrative templates, then go to Windows components, then go to Windows Defender, antivirus, Go to real-time protection. Go to turn off real-time protection. Go to property or edit. It might take a second to pop up. And then go to enable. Now if you enable disable, essentially, that means you're disabling it. Now that will disable the real-time protection only. Only do this if there's a conflict of interest between you and your game, and if you have a slow processor. All you have to do is open up Task Manager and see what it's spiking at. Like I said, both Superfetch and the malware protection was spiking at 25%. What each that is, so combined up to 50%, and then they're probably averaging 10% each. So those two things combined, along with what I did in game, yielded a playable performance. Clearly not ideal, but you know what? Some 14-year-old kid might have this similar computer on his desk and wish he could play Fortnite right now and do those things. And you can just stay away from porn sites. And this computer is going on Craigslist for probably $100.